Hi, everybody. This is Tanessa Audet, and welcome to Tanessa Talks. On this episode, we are going to discuss freedom of speech, First Amendment, and the media. But before we get into that, make sure that you like, subscribe, follow, and give us that 5-star review. Enjoy the show. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Tanessa Talks. On this episode, I have a new face that you haven't seen yet. And you're going to have this happen often if you're tuning in. And it's because this format obviously is different than maybe some other podcasts in that I am an elected official. I do have a very strong background in history and government. And so I, at all times, am trying to elevate the expectation of what representation should look like. And I think you should know the people that represent you, the ideas that they have, and their why to a lot of things. And so I'm going to bring people on that I think represent different aspects of our society that can sort of speak to and ask questions from their perspective of how they're seeing the world, how they're viewing what's happening, and sort of ask those questions of an elected official of government to talk about the theories and the ideas that are sort of guiding decision-making and point of view. And so my guest today is Aaron Tesoro.
Hello. It's great to be here, Tanessa.
Yeah, he's sort of my communications guru, and we have been working together for a very long time.
10 years.
Yeah, at least. We worked on our very first campaign together and sort of had very similar sort of frustrations with communications and how do you really get a message out there in many different forms, which we'll talk about today. But yeah, so why don't you give them a little bit of your background and your bio and why you're so great?
Yeah. Well, one, I love that your podcast has different interviewers.
Yes.
And, most podcasts, it's the one person interviewing all these different guests. You're bringing people to share different perspectives or to interview you as a government official from a different angle.
Yeah.
So I'm Aaron Tesoro. I'm a communications consultant, and I work at the intersection of media, government, and the public. So how does that message relate? How does it resonate? And I work a lot with officials, but most of the time it's with reporters to get a story out or to elevate an issue that's important to the people. But my passion is that information and that story is accurately covered. And that's something that's really tricky to see in the media. So I'd love to have a conversation today about, from the government perspective, from an elected official's perspective, what is the purpose of media? How can we as citizens understand, interpret media better and the purpose that's supposed to be? So we've worked together, 10 years, like we said, and that is the strategy of how do you share the issues that are important to you? How do you work through the media that is always having its own agenda? So reporters have their own story. We all have a bias. Let's not kid anyone.
Yes, for
we
sure.
all have a bias. Let's just own that and let's be honest about it. And then as consumers of media who are learning about what the government is doing or learning about what these issues are, we need to be wise and savvy in how we interpret headlines and how we can actually look to the source versus just look at the narrative and the story that's being put out there. So passionate about all of those things. Tanessa and I have lots of great conversations about policy, government, and media. So I'm excited today to talk about that in depth.
Yeah. I think a lot of times PR and media and communications gets a bad rap because it's almost like it's sales.
Right.
Right? So it's like you're trying to sell people on something, but traditional press and media played such a pivotal role in the development of America and the development of our country and around the globe and through all of history. The more information you had, the more power that you had, because knowledge is power. And when you know that something is possible, you'll take great risks. You'll have great courage when you think that things that have seemed impossible become possible, which I think is sort of the secret sauce a lot of times of believers is that, you just sort of have this sense that there's something more powerful than you. And if you can tap into that goodness, then you can overcome the thing that's actually harming a society or a person or whatnot. So I think that there's this intersection right now between, we're taping this after Charlie Kirk has been assassinated. We're taping this after this radical extremist has shot and killed somebody for espousing their beliefs, for communicating,
Right.
for literally communicating. Not an elected official, has no power to actually make a decision that is going to affect somebody in the government. They are a voice, the
Mm.
same as everybody else, but it has been elevated because of its agreement, because of its tenacity, because of its impact on ideas and in that marketplace. But but this ideology has now murdered, assassinated, one of the truth tellers of our day. And so this is after that. All the rest of the shows that I have done were previous to that event. And so I think right now, probably the public, and when this eventually airs, the public is pretty raw
Mhm.
and I think ready for a conversation because people are being canceled. Free speech is being discussed. And when we talk about communication, I think what we have to, I always try to go back to is, well, what were the values as a government official? What are my restrictions? What have we done to limit government? And what have we done to empower people? Because that's really what our form of government was going after. How do we empower people and limit government? And speech was just such a huge part of that because um, if you can't discuss ideas, you'll never advance society.
Right. And that's a big part of this conversation right now is that First Amendment,
Yeah.
is freedom of speech. You know, how it feels like that's being attacked now, or it feels like there's certain cases where you can't speak about certain things. Let's start at the basics.
Okay.
The First Amendment, the freedom of speech, how do you interpret that and how do you see that for all of us?
Yeah, well, I see it as a limit to government. I see it as a protection for the public to be able to discuss any and all ideas, especially those that can be listened to and can shape public opinion that can then influence government. And so, and the laws that we pass and what we're able to do. Now, there are certain, when the Constitution was passed, we're setting up a form of government, right? We've declared our independence from England and we're setting up our form of government. And really, I call myself a limited government conservative. And most people are like, well, I don't really know what that means. Right? Like, what exactly does a limited government, like, nobody likes government. I don't care if you're a Democrat or Republican, nobody's gonna give me the list of the things that they love that government does. They may have expectations of government, but no one's like, "Oh, you know what I love? I love welfare." No, no one loves welfare. They feel like it's a necessity and it's an expectation that the government is gonna protect the poor, that type of thing. But no one's like, "Oh, it's the greatest thing that's ever happened, and we love it so much." And so it's very difficult to have a conversation about founders and limited government when we've created this atmosphere in our education system that they're all evil
Right.
and that they're all bad. It means we're not having discourse. And what's so fascinating to me is Turning Point USA had to chapter in each of these colleges and the schools because the schools were not inviting that debate. The professors were not inviting debate. The professors were not inviting diversity of
In
viewpoints.
in schools where that has always been the hallmark of education
Oh,
is get challenged with other views, get challenged with other perspectives, but that has been dwindling
yes, there's
in
no
recent decades.
yeah, civic discourse has really changed,
Yeah.
our I would say the 5 pillars of our society, were family, church, government, education, and business. These are sort of those 5 pillars of what makes up our society, and really what we've seen over, I would say, the last few decades is this government sort of putting itself over that, and then society at large all being squashed.
Mm.
And I think nothing really showed that more than COVID, where all of a sudden, all these pillars you realized were all being dwarfed by government. Government said, "Hey, churches, you can't be open. Hey, businesses, you can't be open.
Mhm.
Hey, families, you don't have any more ability to pick what your own child is doing." Like all of a sudden, you realize government has tried to outmaneuver and to come above all of these pillars that we have had in society. That sort of we rest on all of them, and we want all of them to work together. And government has really exerted its power over these things, and it's not, like, working in conjunction with its rulership.
Well, COVID was a great example of that, even coming in and telling media outlets, social media platforms what
Yes,
should or should not be shared
correct, yeah.
because it didn't align with maybe the current science or the current understanding of science or perspectives. And now there's investigations showing that the government did have a hand in influencing or trying to limit what
Which
was seen,
and that is
which would
an
be the government
Yep, and that's a
coming in.
direct violation of your First Amendment. We
Mhm.
we are supposed to have a free press. Free press means free from the overreach of the government, meaning say you can and you can't, but also free from being coerced to do things.
Mm,
And so, same as you can't establish a religion in the government, you also can't infringe on people's religions. So, we don't want the government to create something, and we don't want the government to limit something,
yeah.
in these First Amendments. And so all of those First Amendments, I mean, my great frustration, I was not an elected official at the time of COVID, and so my great frustration often was we should be arguing these are our First Amendment rights. Not that the government is bad and not that this person is wrong or that person is bad and that person's it's like, no, no, these are our First Amendment rights. This is a civics lesson. And I feel like that's the reckoning that we're under
Yeah.
right now is that in light of many things that have happened. But it's just like there's just this reckoning of society has gotten out of order. Government has gotten too big. It's too much a part of our lives. It is literally trying to make every decision for us. It is trying to influence everything that we're doing, whether that's social media or, I mean, all of the different things that people are getting in trouble for, all the different areas where you have legislators trading and making millions and millions of dollars, right? So they're basically taking that special knowledge that they have that they've been entrusted with and they're using it to profit themselves, and that's not right, and
And
we
that's
all
what
know it's not right.
citizens hate that.
They hate
Citizens
that.
just see the corruption in that. They see that this is not just, this is not fair,
Yeah,
and but it feels like there's nothing we can do about it.
right. Well, you can. I feel like if this is the lesson that all of America can get is you have the power, vote them out. This cognitive dissonance that once you get somebody elected, you have to keep them there forever. Let's just break that. Like that is, I think, the most
If it's not
detrimental.
working, try something new,
It's
right?
just yeah, like our Congress people only served for 2 years for a reason, because they knew it was going to be very much reactive to the people, and so they knew that it would kinda come up and down by the whims of the people, like, "Hey, we need this today, but we don't need that tomorrow," you know what I mean? Like, it would be very volatile. You only need 50% to get something passed through the House, on the federal level, and so it was very much going to be a reactive type of body. You want that. However, you need that tempered by the Senate. And so what you have now is this constant, like, I need to have all the power in order for my agenda to go through, and not this discourse that's happening of like, well, let's discuss these ideas. Let's discuss this in the public forum. First of all, let's discuss this at home. Right? We're not even at the dinner table anymore. We have every distraction. We've got sports, we've got clubs, we've got, second jobs, third jobs, fourth jobs. We've got all these things that sort of take us away from the dinner table at home to discuss these things. Because if there's ever a place where you should be learning political discourse, where you can disagree and love each other and serve dessert, where it's not do or die and you have to cut your family off. I mean, this entire idea of we're gonna cut people out of our lives, that is the work of a cult. That is a hallmark of a cult where you no longer you refuse to speak to somebody because they don't agree with you. And we're so deteriorated at the family level, what do you expect? And so then the next thing would be church, right? So churches should be discussing what's happening and what culture is looking like and the directions that we're going in culture. And then we sort of hem-hawked that in the 60s and said, no, no, you can't talk about that anymore. And you can't talk about this one aspect where you can't endorse. And they took that as an excuse to never talk about politics again. And you're like, don't endorse anybody. That's fine. But talk about it.
Talk about the
Talk
issues.
about
Yeah.
the issues. Talk
Mhm.
about, have some discourse where you can agree, constructively. And then, it would be the workplace, but we don't even go to work anymore. We're working at home. There's no water cooler to like discuss these ideas with anymore or to be like, hey, did you see this or did you hear that? And
And no one's having a sidebar conversation on Zoom. about
No, if you're
politics
in the
while
chat,
everyone's
yeah,
watching
yeah.
you.
No, well, that's the thing. If you're in the chat, we're all
You're
gonna find
missing these
out.
moments
You
to
know?
really feel, hear, and learn what your colleagues and your coworkers and people are thinking
Yes.
about the current world around them,
Ex
about
Yeah.
the issues that affect their very lives. I'd love to talk more about civil discourse. Maybe let's do that in another episode
Yeah, for sure.
and dive deeper into that because that's a whole thing in and of itself. But back to media First Amendment, there's a lot of drama right now about cancel culture and about media outlets canceling shows or people and the government being involved in that. In my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, companies and media outlets can do whatever they want. It's the government that cannot influence them to remove something or to censor something, as long as it's in line with the First Amendment. What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, you have to remember that the Constitution is the limits of the government, not the limits of the people. All rights remain with people. And so when I'm a person and I have a business and it's my business and I've, taken the risk to start a business and to grow that business and you go down that road, you have standards by which you get to decide this business is going to be run. And I'm sure we've all seen the signs, no shoes, no service, or something like that, where it's like, listen, here, this is what we are setting this standard. And anybody that has a job knows that there are, you know, different clauses of like, we expect this type of behavior, we expect this type of discussion and that type of thing. So freedom of speech does not mean freedom from consequences. And so if you put your ideas out in the court of public opinion, then you should anticipate that there are going to be counter arguments to that and there can be consequences to that. And that is the determination of that business, that employer, and society at large, right?
Yeah.
They're going to tell you what's a reprehensible idea. In psychology, they talk about this. They say, like, for every, like your five fingers, like for every one, like five ideas that you have, four are insane. Like, this is why we actually like process these things out loud. That's why we talk to other people. That's why you're not born in an individual, like meaning all on your own. You're born into a family. You're born with a mother and a father, which are two diametrically different types of people that, that have figured out how to come together on things they agree with and not break up on the things they don't agree with. You know what I mean? Marriage is your first example of loving people you don't agree with. And so I do think that we have very much confused the limitations of government with the limitations of people. We are not limited. We actually have the ability to, as a human being in America, succeed and fail. We've been guaranteed the right to fail and succeed based on being endowed by our creator. And our creator is not the government.
Mm.
The government did not create us.
And,
So
and if our speech and our words result in being less desirable as an employee or
yes,
being less trusted in
yeah,
our place of influence, that's a cause and reaction. That's a consequence of my words, not something legal or illegal. That's not a
correct.
First Amendment issue.
And if you lose your job, you have a choice. You can create your own media company. You can create your own show, or you can say wherever you want. Nobody's going to fire you. And the market will decide, is that speech and is that the type of messaging that we want to follow? And so you don't have a right to have a television show. You don't have a right to be elected. You don't have a right to be successful in the marketplace. You don't. You have an opportunity. You have the opportunity to be successful based on the things that you say, the ideas that you have, and how well you can articulate them. And if you can tell a great joke, and if you're funny, and if you make people want to watch you, then you can have a show. And so Jimmy Kimmel has the ability to then go start his own show. There have been many on the right that got canceled and decided that their brand and what it is that they were putting out there was wanted by the public, and they started their own things, and they'll find out if
Mm.
they're successful, if that was true or not. But that's the best teacher. Failure is a great teacher. And in America, it's one of the only places where you constantly have this ability to, even in the First Amendment, you have the ability to redress government so they can make decisions and find out they're not in the best interest. And you, as the constituent, can say, hey, I want to redress this. Like, this isn't working. I want to address the government and what they're doing. It's not like this is final. I'm the king. I've decreed it. You die if you don't agree. And so in creating this grand experiment of America and this constitutional republic, I think what comes with that is naturally Because it's not natural to us to put others first or to think that you can fail and still be okay. There has to be a discussion. There has to be ideas put forward to convince you that that's possible and to reinforce over. It's sort of like, when you get in trouble and you don't want to tell because you're afraid you're going to get more in trouble. You know what I mean? You're like, oh, well, I know I'm not supposed to do that. So I don't want to tell that I did it because then I'll be in more trouble. And then we always say that the cover up is worse than the crime. Just tell the truth. Just say what happened. Like, we all understand human frailty. What we don't understand is that you think you're going to get away with it and create so much more chaos in your cover up than you would if you just were honest about being a human being.
And that's one of my biggest pet peeves in public relations
Yeah.
is when companies or corporations try to gloss over or try to smooth or try to redirect and not own, hey, we had this problem and this issue. Here's how we addressed it.
Yeah.
That's all people want to know.
Yeah. And here's
They
what
want
we
to know, we
learned.
saw the problem.
Yeah.
Here's how we are affected or how people are affected. And here's what we're doing about this issue.
Yeah. And you know who never does that is government. They never admit their fault. Like, look at all of the scandals in the last 20 years. I mean, the IRS stuff that was happening, like nobody got fired. The Russia hoax, pick something. Who got in trouble, right?
Hmm.
Like, who's getting in trouble in the last 20 years for what they've done? It just doesn't seem to happen. And for those on the left that would say that Trump didn't get in trouble, I would say creating novelty type law, changing the statute of limitations so that you can try somebody, changing the definitions of misdemeanors and felonies in order to try, like, that also is not the way that we want our judicial system to work.
Mm-hmm.
So you hating somebody and trying to find a reason to hate them and to punish them is also not the way that our system works, and it shouldn't work that way. And it didn't. It was not successful. But when the government does not admit its fault, and listen, I worked in the Senate. I worked in the Senate for 5 years, and I'm doing constituent services, and we would get calls and complaints, and inevitably, and I'm telling you, this happened, and I did hundreds and hundreds of cases that I opened for people that were redressing the government because a state agency did not fulfill its obligations. And never one time, not a single time, did I get a call back from an agency that said, oh, we made a mistake and we're going to correct it. Instead, what would happen is they would never call me back. They'd call the constituent back and say, oh, we've resolved this issue.
Nothing
We've resolved it.
Nothing to see here.
No. You know what? We just
It's
happened to resolve. All of a sudden, the letter got sent. The thing was completed. The license was renewed. The whatever it was, like, there was so many things that happened that went wrong. And then I would follow up to figure out, well, what went wrong? Like, what went wrong? How do you correct that for the future? And what guarantee do I have that this isn't going to happen again if I get another call? What can I fast track this? Do we have a designation? Like, I wanted to create some structure around what this was so that it would not get ignored again and that we would learn from this.
And it builds trust. And having accountability builds trust. And it feels like we hold corporations in the private sector way more accountable than the government sector.
Correct.
Who work for us, which is
Correct.
interesting. So this is where my love-hate relationship with media comes in.
Yeah.
Because I know how it can be manipulative. I know how it can be very agenda bias driven. However, I have great value and respect for media because it is a critical player in our ecosystem. And so what is the purpose and the best use of media in your perspective as it relates to accountability with the government?
Yeah. So my favorite thing, when I think about the press, my immediate, good example is the Federalist Papers, right? So you had this, we're going to separate from the government. We have a revolution. You've got war, you've got all this kind of stuff. And then you're like, okay, well, now what are you going to do? We have successfully destroyed something, right? We've successfully removed ourselves. Well, now what are you going to create? Because that's the hardest part. It's not hard. Demo day is not hard. There's no expertise required for demo day. You can come in and you can say everybody's corrupt and everything is terrible and nobody does anything right, but then what do you put in its stead and what do you then create? That's really the hard part.
The creativity and the skills to actually put something together.
To build something and the cooperation that has to happen and you can't just be a protectionist. You have to somehow create that space for people to have enough freedom to create. And so this was and you have 13 colonies and many of those colonies had religion as a requirement to live in their colony. Like, they really wanted to protect their freedom of religion, and they ended up basically just,
Mandated.
institutionalizing their religion, because they didn't know another
You're
way.
free to have our religion,
Right,
and
right,
you
right,
can
right,
only
right,
live
and
here.
sign this to say you're going to, right? So, like,
I'm glad we did
also
away with that.
well, yeah, and I think that it's one of those things that if you can build the trust, if you can create the system that actually then they can see that it happens, then they're like, "Okay, I believe that that's possible." And so as they are crafting this constitution. And once they do that, now they have to get the states to go in for it. So maybe their representative was in, there to design it, but now they've got to convince the rest of the people to go for it. And so the Federalist Papers were, basically articles in the press in the newspaper in New York to try to convince New York to ratify the Constitution. And it's 85 essays that were eventually put into a book, but like it's really going to the people to make the argument. It's basically the editorial of our day.
Mhm.
And so the
But
press.
it's also the bridge because as a citizen, I don't know what's happening in
No,
those walls of government
not at all.
unless I, go to that one elected's page and see something they posted on YouTube or on their social channels. So if they don't wanna share something, they're not gonna share it.
Yeah.
And that's where I do count on the press to share or expose things that aren't popular or
Right.
that they wouldn't want to be seen but needs to be seen.
Oh, sure. So the evolution of that is that you then once you ratify this, once you explain, once you're like, here's what government's trying to do. So it's like, okay, so we've set the standard. Here's the standard. The Constitution is the standard. The Bill of Rights is the standard. The Declaration of Independence. We've now set a standard for America, and here are the rules by which everybody has to abide by. And now, press, media, it is your job to hold them accountable to that because how else the whole idea of representative government is that you can have such a vast region, right, where information is not readily available, and you can have that all work together because of your representative. So you have somebody that works full time at this job of representing you, but you get to have your business, you get to be a teacher, you get to be a doctor, you get to be something else and
Mm.
be in the world and or raising your children, whatever it is that you're doing. You don't have to be a full-time legislator to understand the laws that are being passed because the press is keeping you aware of what it is that they're doing. And there's no privacy in the public sector. There's no privacy for an elected official. You need to know. They need to be producing and communicating everything that they're trying to do. And so they're the watchdog. They are the one of the reasons why representative government, a republican, constitutional republican work is because you have the press to be able to hold them accountable. The problem is that if they stop doing that, if they stop holding people accountable, or if they're invested in one side of the
Selective
argument.
accountability, one would
Well,
say?
so this is where okay, this is like there's a whole debate about how we create laws. And there's a more centralized on the left of how laws should be created. And then there's more of the philosophy of the right. So I would say that the philosophy of the left is that you drive culture by the laws that you create. So we want to make everything equal so that there's, 50% of women and 50% of men are in Congress, and if you're going to try to make laws to make that a reality, you're going to harm a bunch of people because there's no freedom. Why? Like, what's the reason for that? What are you going to get? What's the guarantee of that? You're just going to get a 50-50, but that does not guarantee that everybody thinks the same or thinks differently or, that type of thing. And what age and, all the things, right? So it's like you're arbitrarily saying, oh, this is the diversity that we want. And then you would have to step all over reality in order to get that to happen. And then you compromise a bunch of the things that are necessary for its success. If I need 50% and for 50% men and women in the NBA, I'm going to get a much different game,
Mhm.
right? It's not going to be probably very fun to watch, and it's not going to have a market, and they're probably not going to make all the money that they make because no one's going to watch that. And the outcome is pretty predictable. So if you decide that you're going to create the law and then try to push culture into accepting it, then you're going to get a ton of pushback. Roe v. Wade was so highly contested. It was so highly disagreed upon about what we were going to do that it is a constant issue that's coming back and forth, right? Because it wasn't something that was created by the culture. It was created by the judiciary. They made a law and they said this is now legal. And society said, "No, no, 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 that's not right." And they just kept driving this and saying, and now the argument is, "But that's been the law. We should have
The
that."
precedent of
Yeah,
a
they're like,
decision.
but that's what the law," and it's like, "No, the law does not get to determine what society accepts and doesn't accept. It should be that the laws, I would say the right wants laws to reflect culture. So if that's the way that culture is moving, then when you create a law to protect that or to make sure that that's what it is that happens, or to create a boundary line around that, to say, as a society, it's so important, those that are going against that, we want to make sure that we really solidify this idea, you make that a law. But everything doesn't have to be a law. Like, I just want to communicate that to the California legislature. Everything, every idea does not need to be a law, because the government should not try to control every single thing. But this is really the divergence of the left and the right. It is who's going to control everything. And this is why, if you're on the left and you want to understand why the right says that your political ideology is a religion, it's because you treat it like that. So I'm going to be zealous for my faith, but I don't put my faith in the government. So I'm not tithing to the government, and I'm not having every battle at the legislative area where every idea that I have needs to be a law, and every morality point that I have needs to be a law, and everything that I think is good has to be a law. I'm not requiring everybody to go to church on Sunday. I don't think I have to, I'm not that. My faith and my belief system, it does not hinge on government's endorsement or a law. But for the left, it seems like every time that there's an issue, there's gun violence, it's like, okay, well, it seems that their answer, their philosophy, their go-to is take the gun away, control that. And control is a mechanism of religion in its worst form. Not all forms, but like in its worst, it wields control. And so we're over here like, no, that's not what we want. And the media is supposed to go, is that a job for you, government? Are you the ones that should be deciding who has a gun when you have a gun? And we know why we have a Second Amendment. We know why, because that Second Amendment is going to guarantee that First Amendment. All those freedoms that you want have been taken by every government.
So the media is really asking questions, challenging
Should be.
these proposals, and also they should be talking with the people of what questions are rolling around in the
Yes,
public,
if you're
and
reading that paper.
how do I bring those questions to challenge what government is trying to put out there?
Yeah, you have to. You can just look at what's happened to newspapers. The fact of the matter is really the transition happened in 1996 with the Telecommunications Act under Clinton. It absolutely fundamentally changed media because it then allowed there to be monopolies for media. So we went from like 50 different media groups to now you have six. So six media groups. So your entertainment and your news
Or under one
and
roof.
sports are all intermixed. And so you really don't have the ability to not be biased. You have a built-in bias, and you have this consistent message that's going out, which this like and many people know because they've seen it. They've seen the videos where it's like all these broadcasters on all these different channels, and they're all repeating
More
the same
scripted.
script.
More scripted than
Right, and it's like, are we all the same? I mean, the whole point of the states is that they'd be little incubators of communities of ideas, and that they would reflect that different community, and so they should all be different, but you are free to kind of associate and move around, and so typically we would say, well, if you don't like living in California, go move to Idaho, go move to Utah, and then, a bunch of
but if
people
you
do, and
turn on
then
the media, it's the exact same
it is. It's
script.
like the same thing, and you're like, there's no way that that community thinks that. And in the paper industry or in the radio industry, you used to only be able to own 40 radio stations per person or per group that owned it, and now it's got thousands. And so in the newspaper industry, same thing. They basically allowed you to have monopolies, which we used to have very strict monopoly laws for this reason. You don't want a concentration of government. You don't want a concentration of the media. You don't want a concentration of anything, because then they basically choke out all competition and then they rule. I mean, that's you can have a totalitarianism in media. You can have it in anything if it is dictating what it is you have access to. And so when it comes to hospitals, when it comes to all these different other aspects of society, what you've had is the government has instead of the rules and restrictions that it created in order to prevent this type of behavior, it basically has now allowed it. And so since then, and it should not shock anybody that happened because of lobbying. That happened by putting in a bunch of money, and very few people objected to that. Very few Republicans objected to that. Very few Democrats rejected that idea. It was passed with bipartisan support and a lot of bipartisan lobby dollars. And what it did was it actually hurt the American people.
Mm.
And if you repeal things like that, you get back to what we all like all the time. I think to myself, how can they buy that? How can Vanguard, BlackRock, how can these companies own so many? We have monopoly rules. Well, then you go find out, oh, well, this law was passed to basically stop those monopoly rules. And this is why you have what you have. And so very often you can look at different bills that are passed that promise that it's going to be worthwhile. It's going to be for the people. It creates more transparency. It's going to be great. And it isn't. And if you go and look at who's being lobbied, who's putting a bill forward, and how much money is going into that account as far as for their reelection or whatever, then you can obviously know what's influencing them. Obviously. And you don't even have to do it before, you can do it after. But if you think that people are beholden to their constituents, they're not. They're beholden to who can get them reelected, which is money, and who that's coming from is who they are beholden to. It's the same reason why in the state of California and in all states, you take federal grants, you take state grants, you are beholden to that entity as to what your priorities are and as to what it is that you're going to do. And as elected officials, if you don't understand that and you don't actually speak to that and have a media that you can go tell that to, who will
Well,
actually
listen,
report that.
right.
Because really the crux of the issue is not, oh, am I getting the news? Oh, I'm listening to Fox and CNN. I mean, I hear this all the time. Oh, but I listen to a lot of different news. It's like, it's the same company. You're listening to the same company to give you the same message from a couple different people, but it's the same thing and it's the same story. And that's the problem. It's not how they're telling you about that story. It's that they've picked only these 3 to 5 stories. They don't want you to know all the other things that are going on. And when you don't have local papers and you don't have the local news that has the autonomy to be able to report on the things that actually matter to the people, then you get constant legislation that does not reflect what the people care about. Like $250 million in California to run a special election to redraw our districts. Who was calling for that?
Right.
We have $5, $6, $7 gas. Who is calling for $250 million? Why isn't that going to relieve us on our gas bill? Why not?
Right.
If we had $250 million, why are we not putting that into lowering our electricity bill? If we have all this money to spend, why would we do it to redistrict something we're not concerned about?
So that's a great example of the media kind of pushing the agenda of government.
Of
Because
course
if
they
they're
are.
highlighting certain stories, certain issues, and saying this is what the whole nation or the whole world
Yeah,
is
cares
caring
about.
about at this high pitch, we desperately need a solution from government, but maybe it's overrepresented, and it often is. How does
Yeah,
that
or
play?
underrepresented because that is not at all what anybody's talking about. I mean, and the antidote to that is yourself taking some critical thinking like oftentimes people discuss what the news is talking about and I say to myself, is that what you care about? Is that what you're worried about? Is that what you're like, you know what I really wish? I really wish this. And you're like, okay, so you really wish the cost of living was down. Okay, so you want to know who to vote for? Go find out who's running bills on cost of living. We constantly say all the time, like, let's look at the report card of how they voted. I don't care how you vote. I know how you're going to vote. You're going to vote party line. Nobody's impressed by that. Nobody's doing anything different than that. What did you run? What was the bills that you ran? Because that's the amount of time you're spending. I thought it was so interesting that Jim Jordan has never run a bill in Congress.
Hmm.
And you're like, well, what? Why? Like, tell me the merits of that, right? And so you're trying to figure out, like, okay, was that a good thing? Is that like, that's interesting. So you don't want to add to the laws. But it's like, then you go look at someone like Thomas Massey. Are you running bills? And it's like, yeah, to restrict the processes of of government so that we run more efficient one-page bills, removing this, removing that. So it's like, those are good okay, I can go that philosophy, like, you don't wanna add to the regulation. Okay, and you wanna make sure that the bad bills, you are spending the most time combating those. Okay, yeah, that's a good argument for me. But if you're running 10 bills and they're trivial and they are what nobody's asking for, or they just pay and have government pay for another thing or whatever it is, like that also should be on the report card. What are you spending your time on? Because in California, we are drowning in costs. And if they're not out there representing that, then it's not going to be covered by the media. It doesn't even have the opportunity to be covered by the media. So I think media is super important, right? They're the watchdogs. But if they don't have the ability to straight report on what's actually happening and talking about it, and it isn't supported by the rest of the media, so it's in the paper, it's on the news, it's, being talked about at the water cooler, they're talking about it at church, by the eighth time you've now heard it somewhere, you're like, oh, what's going on with that? What's happening with that? And so much because we're on social media with algorithms, it's like, here's the 4 or 5 things that everybody's angry about. And you're like, okay, okay, well, what do you do about it? Okay, so, I'm seeing Palisades, you know, all that fire stuff. And I know because development services I'm interested in that. So I search things like that. So that's about permitting. And this is my algorithm, right? Anybody that's talking about permitting and development services, like this is what comes up for me. But it's really fascinating to think about that because I have family in LA and none of them are talking about that.
Mhm.
So people that live 5 miles from there don't know what's going on with that. That's not in their algorithm. They're not looking up permitting.
Well, so with that landscape for the busy citizen,
Yeah.
and my friends and family, like, where do I go for this? What are your favorite resources for finding what's going on in the news, but then also looking up what representatives are doing? What are your favorite resources?
So I would say, first, I don't let the algorithms or the media decide what I'm interested in. I know what I'm interested in, and I search for that. So, and then
So being proactive on the issue you care about.
yeah, like, I'm like, when I go fill up for gas, you're just like, "Okay, it went down. Why did it go down? I thought they said there's gonna be another tax." And so I may go search out, like, what am I paying now for taxes in California for the ga I mean, I'm just gonna go search out the question that I have, and I'm gonna ask the question instead of going to a news source that I think I can trust and getting lost and distracted into what they're arguing about. And so which I probably don't care about, but it's entertaining. If I wanna know what my legislators are doing, lots of times they'll send you a newsletter, and they'll have a list of all the bills that they run because they're proud of them. That's like a mark for them is if they can get a bill passed in a state that has 400,000 regulations. Thank you so much for adding another one, you know what I mean? And so I would say, finding out that's one way that they'll just send it to you. They'll just send you that information. Um but all of that legislative you can Google their names, and you can find out their voting record, and you can find out the bills that they have their name on it. You just go to I believe it's like, californialedge.com or something to that effect, but you can just or whatever state that you're in, Florida, you can Texas, you can go and look in on that state and find out what that legislator put forward for bills, because that should also be on the report card. How are you spending your time? Who are you helping, and what are you helping them with? And tell me how many constituents you helped, and what's the most common issue that keeps coming up for constituents in our area. That's another way to find out, like, what's actually happening. Like, wolves are a huge thing that are happening in our counties in the north. Like, they are attacking our ranchers, like, every day, like, pretty excessively, and there was money set up to pay for it, but there's not enough, it's running out, and so that's a major issue. It's not on the news every night. It's not, and there isn't a push for it, and if you don't have a radio show and a newspaper and the television and the internet and your algorithm, if that isn't all coordinated to be doing that or talking about that, then you're not gonna know. But what is coordinated to talk about, I would say largely are usually distractions, which is why events that kind of pull you out, like an assassination or that kind of thing, it absolutely changes the conversation, and it exposes really what's going on and why it's going on, which we can kind of get into civil discourse on the next
Yeah.
one.
I would love to dig into that more. I think when I talk to people, that story selection thing is
Yeah.
a huge part of it. And I tell people, find us a place that just shows you what's being covered and not. Like
Oh,
Ground
yes.
News has a
That
tool
you gave
that
me that one. That was a
Ground
great
News
one.
they don't try to have an opinion from what I've seen. They try to say the left is covering it from this perspective and this percentage. The right is covering it from this perspective or not covering it at all. And so you get to see, like if you're on the right or the left, you get to see what is not being fed to you from your normal streams. So if you have a tool like that, and then find a couple trusted independent podcast type voices.
Yeah, you
Because
tell us
they
those ones.
they aren't they aren't in a corporate structure
Yeah.
that is beholden to advertisers, special interests, the board,
Yeah.
just someone who is curious. And so I always tell people, find a couple curious people. They're not always going to be right,
Right.
but at least they're exploring and they're digging and they're going, deep into the issues that you care about. So find a podcast or an independent journalist that is
Like
on
Michael
your
Schellenberger. He's a
Michael
great
Schellenberger
one.
is fantastic. He
Yeah.
digs into things. He asks the hard questions, but he's not trying to insert a major opinion. He's trying to just clarify what is going on and find the truth under it.
Yeah.
So true journalists versus maybe advocates for a cause is what I would look for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Ground News, that was a good one. That was it, Ground News?
Ground News is what I
You
like.
gave me that one, and anytime I see a story that is completely not being told on the right, I'll go read that. That usually is my impetus to be like, "Oh, I gotta see what it is they're talking about," and it's super fascinating to see what it is that people are reporting and saying that we don't that is kinda hidden from the right.
Totally.
Super
And
fascinating.
then that drives what we talk about to our neighbors,
Yes.
to our families, to our
Yeah.
friends, and it also changes the tone of
Yeah.
how we talk about it. So next time, let's talk about our tone and how we interact and how we advocate for these principles that we care about.
Awesome.